We're here today to speak with one of the contributors to our new book, How to Heal Our Divides. Reverend Wesley Granberg-Michaelson is a global ecumenical leader whose work has highlighted the intersection of faith with public life. He was legislative assistant to Senator Mark Hatfield, director of Church and Society for the World Council of Churches, and served for 17 years as general secretary of the Reformed Church in America. He chairs the board of Sojourners, an advocacy ministry linking faith and social justice. He also serves on the boards of Church Innovations Institute and the Global Christian Forum. And last year, he dedicated time to Faith 2020, connecting people of faith with the values of progressive candidates for the 2020 election. So, Wes, it's so wonderful to have you participate in this program. I really greatly appreciate that.
Well, thanks, Brian. This whole initiative is really vital. It's a terrific one. I'm privileged just to have a small part in it, and I'm grateful that you're doing this.
Well, like I said, it's really an honor to have you involved in it. Mm-hmm. So I kind of gave a brief overview of a ton of things that you've done in your career. Could you maybe talk about some of those in a little more detail?
Sure. I think, Brian, that there's a thread that's gone through the various opportunities I've had, and that's been one of seeking ways to overcome some of the divisions that I've experienced most personally. Now, we experience all kinds of divisiveness within society, and the book and this initiative addresses many of them. The one that began to impact me deeply were the divisions within the religious community. I was raised in a strong evangelical background, for which I am grateful. But those divisions became apparent in the attitudes of my folks towards my two best friends that lived across the street when I was a young boy, because they were Catholic. And my mom told me, bless her heart, that maybe I could be a good missionary to them. But they were of a totally different group from whom we were alienated. And that planted seeds of the way in which divisions intersect some of those areas of life, particularly our Christian faith, our religious observance, that are most precious to us. And so why is it, I began to feel, that religion itself, and if you keep just within the framework of Christian faith, my own tradition, that holding Christian faith divides you deeply from others who hold that same faith? I mean, this sort of makes no sense. But these divisions are huge and historic and deeply, deeply hurtful. So as I went on my path and got into the U.S. Senate as the assistant on the staff of Senator Mark Hatfield, I came up against this again, Brian. Mark Hatfield was a strong evangelical, but a strong had a strong commitment to peace and to justice, especially in his opposition to the Vietnam War. And that's where he and I kind of really served together. I was his chief legislative assistant and all that work, and he and Senator McGovern were sort of the two congressional leaders in that effort. And so he would go and speak to different audiences, especially evangelical audiences, colleges, and so forth. And he was met often with some of the fiercest kind of opposition. I remember him he shared this in one of the books that he did that we worked on. He would get a letter that would say, "Dear former brother in Christ." And that was on the basis, that he had departed from some tenet of orthodoxy? No, because he was opposed to the Vietnam War.
Wow.
And so you saw those. I experienced those divisions in that realm. And then when I went into the ministry, I was fortunate enough to be given the opportunity to serve as one of the staff directors for the World Council of Churches in Geneva. And so here again, the World Council is set up as the major ecumenical historic organization in the world. But even here, the World Council was comprised chiefly of, and is today, of historic Protestant churches and of the Orthodox churches. Now, just getting those two together is huge. Because again of those sorts of deep historic divisions, we can't think, for instance, of sharing in communion, in the Lord's Supper. It's not even clear from an Orthodox point of view what other groups they would regard as true churches, and so you're in you're in a situation where those divisions are, and these are just not theological. These become really painful. These wound people. And then the Catholic Church is not a part of the World Council. They participate as a partner in things, but they're not a partner. And the Catholic and the Orthodox, since 1054, we're going on 1,000 years, have had this huge division that set Christianity going in different directions. And then with the Reformation, of course, the Protestant churches unceasingly divide from one another. There are today in the world, and listen to this, there are 45,000 separate denominations.
What?
45,000.
Oh my goodness. I never had any idea it was that many.
You go, yeah. And I'm not kidding. You go to the people at the, who compile the World Christian Encyclopedia, the best database of Christianity around the world that exists. And this is all documented. And then the evangelical and the Pentecostal communities, which are the fastest growing, especially the growth of the Pentecostal community, has been astonishing. But most of them, with very few exceptions, won't come near a group like the World Council of Churches because they think it's too liberal, or it's ecumenical, doesn't have the true faith. So in the world of Christian faith, we have these unbelievable divisions, and they split families. They induce deep harm and injury, of judgment and rejection. And then historically, it's been worse. There have been wars in which, if you go back to the 30 Years' War, to the religious wars in France, you're talking about millions who have been killed. So Brian, it's that particular area of division that kind of captured my passion, and partly because of my own autobiography. A lot of us do things in life out of our own journey, and so I was raised as this evangelical, and I couldn't understand why why my two best friends from across the street, who might go ride bikes with, were not considered Christian, even though they went to a Catholic church. And when I asked them questions about what they believed and what I believed, the only difference I could find is that they got to have a St. Christopher medal on their bikes and I didn't.
That's great. So along the way, you've also written many books. And maybe you could talk about a few of them, and in particular, the most recent one, Without Oars.
Well, sure. I have been able to write, and I really enjoy it. Probably the book that tells the most about this journey is what was essentially a memoir called Unexpected Destinations. And the subtitle was An Evangelical Pilgrimage to World Christianity. And that kind of charts my own journey in which I became very involved in starting new ecumenical initiatives, first Christian churches together in the USA, and then very involved in helping to this day the Global Christian Forum, which is an initiative designed to, in a fresh way, overcome the very divisions I've been talking about. I then wrote something called From Times Square to Timbuktu, the post-Christian West meets the non-Western church. And that particularly focuses on the divide between the global North and the global South, and how the church in the global South is growing so fast and exhibiting all this new vitality. Church in the global North finds itself often in a more stagnant situation, but how all the power and money and theological influence traditionally has been in the global North. And so those divisions and how you overcome, how you try to overcome those. My most recent book that I'm most excited about, you've mentioned, it's Without Oars, casting off into a journey of pilgrimage. And here I really try to share how it's this both image and experience of pilgrimage that defines so much of our life as Christians. That we can't think of Christianity as being defined mostly as the right set of very narrow beliefs that we hold in our heads and then use those to divide ourselves from one another, but how Christian faith has to involve the embodied practice of pilgrimage, of how we act, how we live out, and particularly how historic pilgrimages and ones that go on today are ways of really expressing that, as I experienced on the Camino de Santiago in Spain and elsewhere. And it's been helpful to see how that image of pilgrimage speaks to the very thing we've been talking about. When you are on a pilgrimage, literally with people with whom you share differences, you often find ways of building bridges and reconciling those. It's even the case, the Camino de Santiago has this 1,000-year history, and in the Middle Ages, there were occasions when judges would hear the case of, say, two people living in the same area who got into violent disputes, and they'd come before the court at that time, and the judge would, try to prescribe something, and then his sentence would be to send these two people on a pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela.
That's
take
amazing.
3 months and walk there together, and then come back. By the time you get back, you'll have your difference worked out. It's a true story. Really.
Goodness. Well, that speaks to the seriousness of the impact of pilgrimage, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So let's talk about your chapter in the new book. It's focused on the Global Christian Forum. So please tell us a little bit about that in a little bit more depth.
Well, so if you try to envision how Christianity is divided around the world, Brian, you could kind of find 4 main families. They've got the Roman Catholic family. The Catholic family comprises just about 1/2 of all Christians. Then you have the Orthodox family, and these, of course, are those who, if you talk to Orthodox, they'll say, well, we've come straight from the apostles, we've never changed. And they are rooted in that tradition. We think of them in the United States as Eastern Orthodox. That's kind of, or Greek Orthodox. But in fact, there are many families of Orthodox churches that carry that tradition throughout the world. Then you have your historic Protestant churches that have come largely from the Reformation, my own denomination, Reformed Church in America, and the Presbyterians and the Methodists and the Lutherans and, those, what we often call mainline, just call them historic Protestant denominations. Then finally, you have the Pentecostal evangelical family. These Christians are in the sweep of history, especially Pentecostalism, although they trace their roots to the Pentecostorian Acts. In fact, Pentecostalism as a really active faith is only about 110, 120 years old in expressions that have come since Azusa Street, but it now totals about 640 million people in the world. 1 out of 4 Christians, or if you do the math, 1 out of 12 people who's alive in the world today will self-identify as Pentecostal or charismatic. Wow. 1 out of every 12 people alive.
Wow.
Now, these 4 groups live in 4 different worlds and generally consider the other 3 as missing the mark. And sometimes those divisions are really severe, like, the way I was taught growing up. Well, Catholics are going to hell. Or Pentecostals saying, well, anyone who's involved in the ecumenical movement, that's just work of the devil. These are things that people believe today. I'm not exaggerating. So the Global Christian Forum began when some of us in the World Council of Churches and others who were not looked at the whole global scene and said, we've got to provide a platform, a safe space. We're not going to build another organization, but we got to create a place where we could get leaders from these 4 main streams of Christianity to come together and to simply get to know one another, to try to understand one another, and to begin to build some trust. And the existing institutions, like the World Council, I was on its staff, its governing board, doing terrific work. But as I say, the Catholic Church not fully apart, Pentecostals and Evangelicals generally absent. And then you've got the World Evangelical Alliance, you've got the Pentecostal World Fellowship, and you have the World Community Reformed Churches, you've got the World Methodist Council, you've got the Lutheran World Federation, et cetera. We're all siloed and still living in these separate identities. So we started with a very simple goal. We got to provide a safe space. It can be off the record. It can be private, but a place where we begin to gather representative leaders from all those major streams of Christianity and see what can happen, see what can build. And that was the impulse, which started about 22 years ago and had the blessing of the World Council and gradually got participation from the Evangelical, Pentecostal, Roman Catholic, Orthodox, and so forth. So that's the seed, Brian, of what at least what the hope and vision was.
So what do you think that they've accomplished, over the past 20 years?
Oh yeah, I want to tell you what happened. When we first gathered, we said, how are we going to even get one another talking together? What are we going to do? Because, in other ecumenical initiatives, you'd say, well, let's talk about our theological differences, or let's talk about some common concerns we may have in common, or maybe we're all concerned about climate change, or let's talk about evangelism, but any one of those, they still have limitations, and one of those involved early on. His name was Mel Roebuck. He teaches at Fuller Seminary. He said, we need to hear one another's stories. We need to simply understand where we've come, how we've come to faith as individuals. And so in that first meeting, we tried to simply ask each person to take some time to share the story of their journey with Jesus Christ, how God had led them in the course of their life to the place where they are, to give kind of a spiritual autobiography. It was amazing what happened. This group of highly diverse Christians suddenly found a way to connect with one another. And in time, this began to be the hallmark, the methodology of every global Christian forum meeting, to begin by giving space for all those who were present to share in some depth the story of their spiritual journey. We had our first global meeting after several regional meetings in Limuru, Kenya. And it was, I'm trying to think, it was 2007, I believe. And I'd been working hard with the committee to kind of get this launched. And I was good friends by this time with the president of the World Pentecostal Fellowship. His name is James Leggett. He since died, but he was a global Pentecostal leader. And I talked to him, said, Jim, you really need to come to this meeting in Limuru in Kenya. He was very reluctant. He said, is there going to be any press? No, there'll be no press. I mean, what would I say to the peers on my committee? So, well, you're just going to gather with other Christian leaders. Are we joining an organization? No, you're not. I'm not asking you to join an organization. I'm just asking you to come. So he finally said, okay, Wes, I'll come. And he arrived. And we got there. And the first day he said to me, Wes, do you think that the General Secretary of the World Council of Churches would be willing to meet me? And I said, Jim, of course he would. But there'll be no press. There'll be no. I said, let me see if we could have lunch. Well, the General Secretary of the World Council of Churches at that time was Sam Kobia, who was also happened to be from Kenya. So the three of us had lunch. Well, Sam Kobia's father was a Pentecostal minister.
Wow.
And so suddenly Jim Leggett, the head of the World Pentecostal Fellowship, and Sam Kobia, who General Secretary of the World Council of Church, two people who had never met, two organizations that have had almost no contact with each other.
Wow.
They meet and establish this relationship of trust that overcomes each of their stereotypes. Well, that pattern, of course, was present in that whole meeting, because we started the whole time by asking each individual to gather in a small group and to do that kind of sharing. That took most of the first day. I mean, this wasn't like a 2-3. People could take 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes to really tell their story. How often is it that someone has really in a group has said, I want to hear your story of your spiritual journey. I want to hear your story of your journey with Jesus Christ. I want to hear how it is that God, through the course of your life, has brought you to where you are now. In all the ecumenical meetings I had been a part of up to this time, I'd never been in any process where that kind of question had been asked. And interacting around that question creates an entire entirely different dynamic. You overcome the stereotypes that have been there, that you've held, that have been reinforced by your tradition. And you suddenly see, as a Pentecostal, you see a Roman Catholic bishop from Botswana, not as a lackey of a pope who you think might have been the Antichrist, but you see that bishop as a fellow brother in Christ, who's had this amazing journey that isn't like your journey, but obviously he knows the same Lord. So that dynamic, repeated again and again and again, begins to create a whole different sense of community that is one pathway of overcoming divisions that in many cases have divided parts of the church for centuries.
So, obviously it's one thing for church global leaders, right, to have those kinds of experiences and build some trust and build relationships and go through that. How is that then scalable to the rest of us?
Yeah, we've talked a lot about that. First of all, that pattern, what we've seen happen is that when leaders on a global level, and now I'm happy to say that this is all now much more public. The people who participate, they don't have to do this in the closet. This has become acceptable. I mean, that for Christians from different leadership to meet together. We had a meeting a few years ago of the General Secretary of the World Council and the moderator of its Central Committee, the General Secretary of the World Evangelical Alliance, plus their board, the head of the Pentecostal World Fellowship, and the Secretary for the Pontifical Council for Promoting Christian Unity from the Vatican and member of their board. We gathered together at Bossé for 2 days, and we realized it was the first time in history that the key staff and leadership of these organizations had ever met together, same time, same place. Now, as word of those encounters gets out, it gives permission to those at national levels to begin to do the same. So in the United States, for instance, the other similar initiative has been Christian Churches Together, that has brought leaders from, again, those various parts of the church, including the historic Black churches, into a similar fellowship. And as people see that happen, then it gives them permission and the idea to do more in their own local settings. And those, it goes at different levels, but people will come to a meeting of the Global Christian Forum, like we've had 3 global gatherings, and they go back to Ecuador or to Kenya or to Pakistan, and they say, we've got to do the same thing here in our country. And then we've got to do the same thing here in our neighborhood, in our city. So it's not, this isn't some huge organization with all kinds of resources, far from it. We have a model and a vision, and it's the power of that vision which has the ability to attract others.
Yeah, it sounds like you've established role models.
Exactly.
Both in terms of process and people.
And that really is all we've done. And yes, we've had regional meetings, we've had team visits to different regions of the world, we've had initiatives in national settings, we've looked at some issues together, but at its heart, the power of the Global Christian Forum is simply in the model of what it's trying to do, and the basic methodology that we kind of, as I described, we just kind of stumbled into it. But the basic methodology is you gather those who don't know one another, who are suspicious, who have stereotypes of their background, of their training, of how they express themselves, in this case, within the family of Christian faith. And you create a safe space where they can share their own story. And then you simply see what happens. And what happens has been amazing. And then you create all these new platforms, relationships, where different initiatives can be taken on a much broader basis, addressing any number of social issues, of justice questions, of other concerns. But you're able to do that because you have created a base of trust that transcends these traditional lines of division.
Well, you won't be surprised to know that in the conversations that I'm having with the other people that are contributing to this book, who are dealing with other specific types of divides, racial divides, political divides, the methodology is surprisingly similar. Mm-hmm. Of getting people to talk to each other and, let them tell their stories and build up some small level of trust. Mm-hmm. So that's the good news. The bad news is that means that it's a really grassroots kind of a thing that mm-hmm. almost every individual person has to go through themselves mm-hmm. before mm-hmm. they have the same kind of impact. Mm-hmm. So it's not exactly something that can happen, even through a book or through the internet or through TV or any other kind of medium. It has to be people sitting together and learning how to talk to each other civilly and trust each other.
Right.
So as you think about, the Global Christian Forum, what you've learned from that, and as well as the other kinds of things that you've done in your life, what suggestions would you come away with for people who want to do something?
Again, there are all kinds of ways of trying to address these deep fissures and divisions within not just our society, but increasingly they have global manifestations. My biggest learning from my experience is that a part of any attempt has to create space for those who share those differences to tell their own personal journey. I've described what we found to be so helpful and fruitful within the Christian world. But that simple principle, as you've already discovered, can be applied in many other ways. What we tend to do, Brian, I think, is to either assume that we know how the person with whom we differ, whom we even consider an enemy, we assume we know how they think and how they put their life and their thoughts together. And we often make stereotypical misjudgments in doing so. And then we also assume that if we're going to try to address these differences, we're going to talk it through. Meaning, I'm going to explain very carefully why they're wrong. I'm going to be engaged in this dialogue to point out how they're just mistaken. How they've misconstrued facts, how they have gotten the wrong information, how their thinking is mistaken. That never does it. Just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. I mean, okay, within the history of the ecumenical movement, it's been good that we've had a long history of theological dialogue. We could understand one another better. We can try to figure out some of these differences. So, I mean, there's a role, but if you say what really builds a new relationship that overcomes those divisions, it's not just done at a rational or intellectual level. Wisdom is so much deeper than just what's in the mind. And I think the sharing of personal stories is what unlocks that. And what allows then the kind of trust and entry points and connection points that will give either me or the other I'm in relationship with the ability to begin to reframe some of my own assumptions.
Well, I think, as you know, Wes, most of my life was spent more in business, in high-tech business. But one of the things that I gleaned from my experience there was that this whole concept of trust was so fundamental to getting anything done.
Yeah.
And it's still, despite knowing that, hard to believe that, facts and reasoning and logic doesn't prevail, right? that it's something deeper than that.
Yeah. When I was General Secretary of the Reformed Church in America, and dealing with, again, divisions within this own denomination.
Right, right.
I constantly would say, I would think, and often I'd say, trust is the coin of the realm. Trust is the coin of the realm. I mean, if you don't have that, I don't care how many efforts you're going to make at, meetings and resolutions and passing things on the floor of General Synod, et cetera. There's a role for all that. But if you say what's really going to allow this organization to move together in some constructive way, it's not going to be uniformity. It's not going to be widespread agreement on a proposition. It's going to be trust. What can you do to build trust? And
it's not like we're starting from a blank piece of paper, right?
Yeah.
All of these things. We're starting from a position of distrust that has grown, right? And
it is
pretty high.
It's very high, and it's infected our institutions. It's also, unfortunately, our political processes, when you think about it, are based on the assumption of distrust. I mean, you look at something as simple as Robert's Rules of Order. I mean, one of the kind of tangents I go on is why in the world do church bodies use Robert's Rules of Order? It's designed by a general to deal with warring parties. I mean, that's where Robert's Rules came from. And at least if you're in a church body, you should begin by being able to say, we believe that common discernment and common trust is possible. We don't have to start on the basis of division. But so many of our structures are put together in such a way that we take division as a starting point, and the mistrust, because of a whole lot of other factors that you and others have analyzed, the way in which social media functions, the way in which money within the political realm functions, the kinds of incentives people have, that mistrust gets deepened, and it gets amplified in echo chambers, and crossing over those lines of mistrust becomes more and more difficult. But again, a key entry point is to provide an opportunity to listen to another's story. And that's not going to, it's not going to get people on the same on the same wavelength politically, at least not right away. But it's going to enable a different kind of interaction that can be helpful. Certainly helpful for the nation, but helpful for any group that believes that at the end of the day, we have to find a way together of seeking the common good. If you're willing to accept that at the end of the day, we have to find a way together of seeking the common good, then you've got to say, where can we find a means to increasing the possibility of trust in our mutual activities.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, it's going to be hard, right? But it's got to be done. It's desperately needed.
Yep.
Well, Wes, I really appreciate, again, you being part of this project. Thank you so much for contributing to the book and for all the work that you've done. And I look forward to collaborating further.
Yep. Likewise, Brian, I'm so glad for your initiative in doing this. It has the potential to echo far and wide, and I hope over time it will.
Well, thank you again.